and greetings to everyone. My name is Sulizan Samsudin from the Faculty of Education and Sports Studies from University Malaysia, Sabah. Today I am pleased to present my paper entitled Exploring the Use of Busu to Enhance English Vocabulary Skills at a Secondary School in Malaysia. In this presentation, I will focus specifically on how rural secondary school students perceived Busu and what motivated them to use the application for English vocabulary learning. So to begin, let me briefly explain the background of this study. Right, so vocabulary is a fundamental part of second language learning because it supports all four of the language skills, which are reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Without sufficient vocabulary, students may understand less of what they read or hear, and they may also struggle to express their ideas clearly. This issue can be noticeable among students in rural areas because they often have fewer opportunities to encounter and use English outside of the classroom. So in response to this situation, mobile assisted language learning or MAL has emerged as an alternative way to support language learning. So one example of MAL is Busu, which this app provides structured lessons, images, pronunciation audio, short exercises, feedback, and progress-related features. So with that in mind, I will now move on to the specific problems that led to this study. Alright, so as shown on the screen, this study was developed around three main concerns. The first concern is limited English exposure. Rural secondary students have fewer opportunities to use English outside the formal classroom lessons. And then the second concern of this study is the different learner responses. Not every student experience a mobile learning application in the same way. So their proficiency, confidence, learning habits, and digital familiarity may influence whether they find the application Busu useful or difficult. And then the third concern is limited rural context research. Although MAL has been widely studied, fewer studies actually have explored how rural Malaysian secondary students perceive Busu and what motivates them to continue using it. So the main issue is not simply whether Busu is available. The more important question is how the application is actually experienced, especially by rural learners. So this leads directly to the research objectives of this study. The first objective was to explore students' attitudes and perceptions toward using Busu for vocabulary learning. And then the second objective was to identify the motivational factors that influence the students to use Busu. So these two objectives allowed the study to focus on students' own voices, experience, and responses. Moving on to the research methodology of the study adopted a qualitative approach. A qualitative approach was deemed suitable for this study because the purpose was to understand students' experience in depth rather than to measure them only through numerical scores. So the study involved 10 students between the ages of 13 to 16 years old. So they were selected through passive sampling and represented different levels of English proficiency. The the participants of this study used BUSU over an 8-week period, and the main data were collected through semi-structured interviews and reflective writing. These two methods allowed students to explain their experience both orally and in writing. So for the analysis, thematic analysis was used. The data were read repeatedly, coded, grouped into categories, and then developed into themes according to the research objectives. So before presenting the findings, I will briefly highlight the literature that informed the study. Alright, so mobile assisted language learning. MAL refers to the use of mobile devices, particularly smartphones and tablets, to support language learning. So Chineri explained that MAL allows language learning to take place beyond the limits of classroom and location. Previous studies have also associated mobile learning with flexibility, motivation, engagement, and also learner autonomy. However, it is important to recognize that access to mobile application does not automatically lead to meaningful learning. Students must also find the application useful, manageable, and relevant to their learning needs as well. So this point is particularly important, especially in rural contexts where students may differ in access, confidence, English proficiency, and experience with independent learning. Now move on, I will now focus more specifically on BUSU. BUSU is a mobile language learning application that was launched in 2008. Its lessons are structured according to the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR, or CEFR. The application provides vocabulary exercises, pronunciation practice, contextual activities, feedback, and self-paced learning features. So previous studies have reported that BUSU can support learner engagement, motivation, and autonomy. However, many of these studies were conducted among university students or learners outside rural Sabah. Therefore, this study provides a different perspective of exploring how rural Malaysian secondary students responded to BUSU within their own educational and language learning environment. This brings me to the role of vocabulary learning in the ESL context. Alright, so vocabulary learning involves more than memorizing individual words and meanings. So students also need repeated exposure, opportunities to hear pronunciation, and examples of how the words is used in context. So mobile application can support this process through multimedia input, repetition, short activities, and immediate feedback. However, the focus of this study was not to claim that BUSU directly measured or guaranteed vocabulary improvement. Instead, the study explored whether students perceived the application positively and what encouraged them to continue engaging with it. So to interpret this perception, the study used the technology acceptance model, which leads to the second slides, the theoretical framework. So the theoretical framework used in this study was the technology acceptance model, or TAM, developed by Davis in 1989. If you look at the figures shown on the screen, two main concepts are particularly relevant for this study. The first one is perceived usefulness. This refers to whether students believe that Busu was helpful for their learning. And then the second one is the perceived ease of use. This refers to whether students found the application manageable and user-friendly. So in this study, TAM was not simply to produce numerical acceptance scores. Instead, it was used qualitatively to interpret students' explanation, feelings and experience. Their acceptance of Busu was therefore understood in relation to their proficiency, confidence, digital familiarity and rural learning environment. Now that I have explained the framework, I will now move to the main findings of the study. For the first objective, two themes emerged. The first theme was positive attitudes towards multimedia vocabulary learning. The students generally describe Busu as engaging, interactive and enjoyable. So they especially valued the images, pronunciation audio, example sentences and structured activities. As shown in the quotation on the screen, one particular participant explained that pronunciation audio helped her understand better, while another described the learning experience as more meaningful and enjoyable than the normal traditional classroom approach. So what is important here is that students did not respond positively simply because Busu was a mobile application. Their positive perceptions were connected to the specific features that made vocabulary learning clearer and easier to follow. So the second theme was usability and challenges. Although most students perceive Busu as accessible and easy to use, some reported repetitive exercises and limitation involving the premium features. So some lower proficiency students also experience difficulty with the instruction or sentence-based activities. So while the overall responses was positive, the experience was not identical for every student. So let me now move on to the findings related to motivations. Alright, for motivational factors, for the second research objective, another two themes emerge. The third theme was motivation through interactive and gamified learning. Students were motivated by points, progress indicators, immediate feedback, and the satisfaction of completing activities. If you look at the quotation on the screen, one student described earning points as a sense of achievement, while another said that the activity felt like playing a game. However, the motivational value was not only about entertainment. These features gave students small and visible signs of success, which made the learning process more manageable. The fourth theme was flexibility and learner autonomy. Some students used Busu at home or during their free time because the application was easily available on their phones. However, independent use was more noticeable among students with greater confidence and higher proficiency. Some lower students will still depended on structured sessions and teacher guidance. The next slide summarizes the four themes. So if you look at the figure shown on the screen, the four themes are organized according to the two research objectives. All right. Now moving on to the discussion and perception. The findings showed that students generally develop positive attitudes towards Busu after repeated use. They describe the application using words such as interesting, fun, easy, and helpful. So these findings are consistent with the more literature, particularly the view that mobile learning can extend language learning beyond classroom time and create more learner-centered experience. However, from my perspective as the researcher, the most important point is that students did not respond positively simply because the Busu was modern or digital. They connected their experience to practical features such as images, pronunciation, audio, and structured lessons. Also repetition and short tasks. So for rural learners who may have limited exposure to English outside the classroom, these features appeared to make vocabulary learning more approachable. So at the same time, I also observed that positive perception was not automatic for all students. So lower proficiency students still experience difficulty with some instructions and sentence level activities. So this suggests that perceived ease of use dependent not only on the technical design of the application but also on the students' proficiency, confidence, and access to the guidance. So this brings me to the discussion of motivations. The findings suggest that motivation was influenced mainly by three factors: gamification, flexibility, and immediate feedback. So previous studies have shown that game-like elements can increase engagement, while mobile learning allows students to access activities beyond fixed time and place. However, in this study, motivation involved more than points, rewards, or competition. So from my interpretation, Busu motivated students based because it provided small and achievable signs of progress. When students completed a short task or received confirmation that an answer was correct, they felt more capable and were more willing to continue. So another important point is that flexibility did not automatically create learner autonomy. Some students use Busu independently, while others only use it when guided by the teacher. So from my perspective, this is one of the most meaningful findings in the rural context. Access to an application alone is not enough. So students may still require explanation, encouragement, and structured support before they were able to learn independently. Alright, so for conclusion and recommendation, Busu was perceived as useful supplementary vocabulary learning tool by the participant. Students generally responded positively to its multimedia features, structured activities, and feedback and flexible access. Their motivation was influenced by mainly visible progress, game-like activities, immediate feedback, and opportunities to learn outside the classroom. However, this finding also show that Busu should not be treated as complete replacement for classroom instruction by that means. So lower proficiency students may still require scaffolding, explanation, and encouragement from teachers. So for future study research, a large and more diverse sample may be used, and also compare rural and urban contexts or combine qualitative findings and quantitative vocabulary assessment was suggested for future research. Overall, the value of Busu depends not only on the application itself but also on how it is introduced and supported. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope this study provides useful insights into how MOL can support rural secondary school students. Thank you very much. That's all from me.